What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Jason Fox, and we perform a dance of words, analogies, ideas around facilitation, psychological safety. We play with the idea and we discuss the discomfort and explore the edges where we agree and where we disagree with certain topics and approaches. And I am sure that you will enjoy the conversation and exploration as much as we did. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And rest assured that listening to the full episode is definitely worth it because I could not fit it all on one page. And if you want to improve your facilitation skills, why don't you join one of our live online courses of the Never Done Before Academy? Visit neverdonebefore.org/courses to find out what's coming next. And now, enjoy the show. Jason, Dr. Fox, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. I must admit that it took me maybe half a year or a year looking at your profile and feeling a little bit intimidated, not daring to invite you. Public confession.
It's probably like most clients are like that too. It's probably not a good business strategy. I'm glad that you reached out though. I think it was Leanne Hughes, was it, that helped its mutual connection? It's great. I don't know. It's a funny thing having a website, isn't it? And this might come up in our chat, but I kind of straddle the realms of both speaker and facilitator. And there's an odd dance that one needs to do to kind of to be viable as a speaker option on a conference. Ooh. But then a lot of the sensibilities that good facilitators are aware of are antithetical to speaking and vice versa. And so to try to find the alchemy betwixt the two is kind of where the magic is, at least for me, and also the turmoil.
I have not thought of that as a facilitator, you almost want to be invisible, and as a speaker, you lead with your content. Otherwise, why would they hire you as a speaker? And I would not want to drop my usual first question, and this might get us back to where we just paused. So let me press the pause button and ask you, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator? As you
I actually
do, it seems.
I like this as I was listening to your podcast. I like this as I like the tempo of the podcast. It's kind of a good podcast is like jazz, but it's good to know kind of we've landed on one of the tempo points. So I love this question. I've been thinking about how I would answer it in a way that's not too pretentious. Okay, so something that I learned very early on from a mentor of mine, Matt Church, who founded the Thought Leaders Business School. This is back when thought leadership was like a new term before it had become, every second person and their dog is a thought leader on LinkedIn now, where the advice was be careful not to be mode locked, where people identify by the mode that they are. Like I'm a coach, I'm a trainer, I'm a speaker, I'm a facilitator. And so whilst I had an affinity for facilitation and an appreciation and respect for the kind of the profession and the craft of it, I've been careful not to identify too heavily as a facilitator, or when I do, I try to pair it up with another word just so that we can kind of keep it alive, like facilitator provocateur or speaker facilitator or things like that. Having said that, this could be just that I went through a deep hipster phase and I was just trying to be all special and unique compared to the rest of the market, and I confused and confounded the folks that just wanted to know, do I facilitate or not? But I don't know if I call myself a facilitator, but facilitation is a big part of what I do.
Thank you. And I find it fascinating how each of us has a kind of story around the label. Do we like to wear it or not? Or what do we associate? And I think it's funny. I started calling myself a facilitator when I learned that it was a thing. As a non-native speaker, I didn't even know the word facilitator first.
Yeah, that's right. And I was
And
remembering
in Germany, there is no
with,
term for it.
yeah?
It's called a moderator, but a moderator is not the same thing as a facilitator. So I could never identify with it.
And you had someone on your podcast recently, the British lady, talking about how facilitator is a known word and concept, and it's quite
Tanya.
accepted there. Yeah. I find this delving into the kind of the words. I hadn't thought about that as a, with if English isn't the kind of first language, what it's like coming to the word. Because the definition for facilitation is to make things easier, right?
Yeah, from the
really
Latin or French. And this really resonated with me when I came across it, because then looking back, even as an academic and a lecturer, that's what I did with the students. So we would play classroom experiments and use comic books to approach economics. And nowadays I struggle actually to call myself facilitator, because it's not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I find it kind of limiting, because it's, yes, I do facilitate also now in the podcast, but it's not the thing that I would primarily do to generate an income, for instance. But maybe it's more of a philosophy nowadays.
Yeah, I relate to that. I mean, I think that all of us need to maintain an element of mercuriality, like the ability to shapeshift and to kind of contain our multitudes and to show up and serve in whatever role serves the context that we are called to. I mean, what would you call yourself? This is terrible. I don't know why I'm asking this question. I can't stand it when I'm asked this. So, I mean, but how do you answer the question? What do you do?
I invented the term facilitation evangelist for myself. And then I asked ChatGPT what a facilitation evangelist is, and it gave me a beautiful definition that now I wear with pride. So I'm the person who, believes in facilitation and helps others to grow into facilitation and spreads the word about the beauty and power of facilitation.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love it. Because it is an invisible craft that I'd say even still in the Australian context, the mastery that goes into making things seem effortless and easy. And when a good facilitator is doing their job well, they're making themselves redundant. So they're kind of like creating the conditions where all the emergent properties are there and the group is actually progressing through what they set out to do. But it actually takes quite a wise client to recognize the magic that has been woven by the facilitator and to create that effect. And I'm not sure if it's always, that's the market here, at least in Australia, even though I kind of I've worked around the world, but compared to other places like the work that I've done in Europe, it doesn't seem quite always as mature, but sometimes some clients, they get it, they see what's happening, and they appreciate that you haven't forced your own ego into the context, or you haven't derailed it, or you haven't kind of slaved your contribution to some preordained set of slides or activities, but you've been able to be attuned with acuity and aware to whatever is needed to serve the group. And that's actually another thing that I loved your conversation with the magician guy. What was his name? Louis is the hyphenated name. Jean-Louis. Charles-Louis. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes. The magician. Oh, yeah. The public humiliation.
Yeah, that was a great conversation, but there was a bit in there, I think it was, where it was something about, your client books you, but when you're there, you're actually serving the group, you're serving the room, or maybe I've got it muddled up with other podcasts. I kind of went on a binge session of like imbibing as much of your show as I could, but yeah, you've stumbled across a lot of things there. But yeah, the term facilitation, I love that you're evangelizing it, because it needs to be recognized as kind of shining a light on that which is otherwise invisible by design, by intention, but it also needs to be recognized in order to be appreciated.
Yeah, and I wonder, listening to you and the hope for clients to recognize it, I was thinking of cooking and the art to cook, and wonder whether it needs someone who knows the craft and understands the craft to recognize the mastery.
Such a good analogy. Yeah.
So I think because if someone knows how to cook, they can eat something and know how much, even with the most simple dish, they can appreciate the craft that went into it, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's this thing I have at the moment with So I feel very lucky that I grew up in a household where my mum and my nana both loved cooking, and so I had quite an upbringing of cooking. My darling Kim, my partner Kim, her mum was quite busy, and she didn't really have that same thing. So when it comes to reading a recipe from a cookbook, I kind of see it as a bit of a guide, like a loose framework for how to go about cooking things. Whereas Kim and others that I know might like look at the timings and kind of follow the timings. But I'm like, no, the onions, you've got to do it low and slow. Like just get them, like get to that caramelization point. So, because it'll just transform the dish, or, just those nuanced things. And often, and there's the word nuance. Often I think that facilitation, just like cooking, is that acuity for nuance, that attention to those subtle things that collectively make a difference. And I love that you chose cooking, because to me, cooking is like, it's a magic of transmutation and alchemy. It's like, it's synthesis and emergence. So yeah, very good analogy.
Yeah. And I think what I love about your example with the growing up in the household and with the craft. So there are a few things that you know that you put in the onions first and you wait until they're transparent and then you add all the rest. I learned the same from my mom. And my partner hasn't. So she also cooks by the cookbook. And for me, a cookbook is like, a source of inspiration, as you explained it. And I think for facilitation, it's similar. So when I look at activities there's so many facilitation activities, I see them as a source of inspiration, but nothing that I would follow by the instructions. Yeah. And I think it requires the understanding of the nuances and the understanding of the group dynamics that come into play, so that okay, this activity will work or this would not. It's like, how much time does a different vegetable need?
Exactly. I want to play with this a little bit more. I just want to add, because now I'm worried, because I just want to point out, Kim is much better at me in terms of being resourceful with whatever needs to be cooked in the fridge, whatever vegetables kind of need to be used, whatever is a healthy dish, whereas I'm more like purist and stuff like that. So if we don't have like some of the things, I just, I'm a bit more fussy about the cooking thing. But you just made me think about how, say, if you're going to cook something, you see what ingredients you have to work with. You're also looking at the pan to see, like, is it an electric stovetop? Is it a gas stovetop? Are we using a wok or a heavy based pan? And they're all going to be factors in terms of how you approach things. And similarly, you walk into a room. Now, hopefully, we've had some input in cultivating how the room is shaped. But sometimes I've walked into rooms and I've seen a big, long boardroom table with executive leather chairs in this room with no natural sunlight, and I'm thinking, okay, can we go outside? How do we work with this? Or other rooms, it's like cavernous, like they've spread these circular tables, to fill to naturally disperse across the whole room. And like often when I don't know what you're looking for, but like when I'm looking for a facilitation thing, I want to get people as relaxed and comfortable as possible, to get them out of their armor, to feel as at home and at ease as I can. And that often means having to mess things up and strip away overt symbols of hierarchy, structure, and rigidity, so that we can play in those spaces between. But like, what is your ideal, let's just go like a generic canvas of a client for facilitation? They're wanting to come to better alignment around strategy because of different perspectives, and they can't really sort it out during normal meetings and stuff. So they've got this offsite together to come and figure out how they can better work together. What is your ideal room setup? Like, what do you find most conducive?
I think a big, almost empty space, but that still feels warm with daylight, and lots of wall space, and some chairs or couches in the corner so that small groups can find each other, but then a lot of space to also just stand around in the middle so that we can share standing up, and then break out into smaller groups that really feel comfortable, as you say. Yeah.
And then that that open space means that there's room for fluidity if people want to move between topics, but it's not often separate rooms where it's like behind closed doors. We're all together still, but there's enough distinctions within zones so that people can move. I love that.
Yeah. And I have a thing for slight imperfection, because I think that if everything is perfect, it's almost as if you don't want to touch or break anything, or that if you have these beautiful flip charts, then nobody dares to put a sticky note on it, or they would not write on it, but only put sticky notes because you don't want to mess up with this beauty.
Oh, yeah.
And then I think it's in the way of what you described, the participants feeling comfortable, at ease, at their best. Yeah.
I got to say, for most of the venues here in Australia, imperfection is built in. It's part of the service. Like the whiteboards that some of them wheel out, you can hear them from a kilometre away because they're squeaking on these wheels and they're wonky, they're dented. You can see ghost images of the last facilitation thing still on there. When you go to wipe them off, it creates a smear. And often the venue will provide you with these ultra thin markers that, you have to actually be about an inch away to see what has been written on it. So it's, they're determined to, like, perhaps they've over-indexed in imperfection. So I could probably suggest that they just ease up on that. It's like, don't worry, me the facilitator, I've got all the imperfection we need,
And I love
just do your thing.
And I would love to double click on distinction, actually, because there is the imperfection that is in the way to ease. So for instance, I would always bring my own markers, because if people have an idea, hooray, I want them to put it on a sticky note in the easiest and most comfortable, fun way possible. So it should be an experience to use the Sharpie. And if it's an old ball pen or an old
branded bit of stationery from the venue,
and then it's in the way of letting the ideas and creativity flow, and that's then the imperfection that I wouldn't want.
That's good. There's an adjacent concept around useful friction. So one of those things, like eliminating the not useful friction, like pens that don't work and, wobbly tables and all of that stuff. But then there are some things where it's like, the coffee cart is actually 5 minutes walk away. Like, that's great. That's actually awesome, Or even, I love it so much when tech fails. Like, so I try to come as low to no tech as possible, just to kind of preserve optionality and freedom and all the organicness of it. But when the client, maybe I'm kind of brought in as part of an offsite and I'm only a half day as part of a 2-day event. When their tech fails, oh gosh, it's just such a boon. It's just so often so good because everyone relaxes, there's humor, and they try to figure it out. And then because the group can see the person who probably spent weeks preparing their slides, they can see that they're stressed. So the group itself kind of leans in and supports more, and just a different kind of magic emerges because of the kind of hiccup. I like those moments.
Yes. And it brings everyone almost closer together, because then you cannot show the slides. So everyone has to listen a little bit louder, come a little bit closer. And it shows the fallibility. And I think under the condition that the facilitator doesn't freak out and screams at the tech support people.
Yeah, totally.
Them having failed to provide.
Yeah. I try to brief when I'm working with others in an offsite. It's like, there's going to be something that will go wrong. It happens all the time. Like, just hope that it happens early so we can kind of like, cool, there's the thing. Let's roll with it. There's a quote by Nassim Taleb, who wrote Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder. His quote was, "Difficulty awakens the genius." And I've heard him refer to how he gives presentations where he says that he almost intentionally speaks quietly and mumbles a little bit, which means that people need to lean in and listen harder to kind of keep up. And there is something, people say to me all the time that I talk too fast, or, I open up too many tangents and so on. But that's also, to my mind, part of the well, maybe I do talk too fast sometimes. There's some merit in that thing. But there's this thing sometimes where I don't want to make it too easy. I don't want to, we don't want to connect the dots because that robs people of making their own connections. We don't want to make the path so neat and linear because it's rarely neat and linear. People have to kind of perambulate to their epiphanies.
100%. And I think in the opening, you said that the facilitator makes the process seemingly easy. And I think that's where the difference is, that it seems easy, but it doesn't mean that it has to be frictionless and easy. And sometimes this friction helps. And it reminds me of a early podcast I recorded with Colleen. She's a video game designer.
Oh, yeah.
And so we spoke about game design and how it translates to facilitation. And her example was...
I haven't listened to all 260 of your sort of things. Sorry,
Shame on you.
That one. Sorry.
That's why I'm sharing. So she refers to golf play. So the goal of golf is to put the ball into the hole. So you could pick it up and just walk over to the hole. Nobody would play golf. So the trick is to have this long thing and to make it very difficult. So that's a challenge that enhances the experience. And in facilitation is similar. We don't want the group to just have it the very easy way, but there needs to be the slight friction that is challenging enough without being frustrating.
Yeah, very much so. The first book I wrote was called The Game Changer, which tried to unpack motivation science and game design. So totally with this. And partly it's ironic because then a lot of clients were like, well, how do we gamify things? And they were looking for the easy, quick fix path to solving complex challenges that involve groups of people interacting together. And all facilitators know is that you can't come from outside of a context with some sort of pre-packaged solution. We are all, in our own ways, complexity practitioners. We work with our clients, we work with the context and that thing's there, and we help to, what was that term you used? Facilitation?
Yes, facilitation, facilitated manipulation.
Yeah, I love it. I love that term. And this kind of this benevolent facilitation. Facilitation. Gosh. Anyway, this links back to something I was trying to mention at the start, because my hesitation around pure facilitation, as in the pure invisible facilitator, is that if you've done that enough times, there are going to be moments where you realize, you know what, this group does not need the invisible facilitator right now. They need someone to step in, hold some context, and potentially hold the tension. And rather than just smooth things over because everyone wants harmony and everyone wants to get along and make things nice and to tick boxes and to get through the run sheet, if you've done facilitation enough times, you know, okay, there's a pattern here. I have a perspective that I think will be useful to break this pattern, to kind of catalyze us to be out of this kind of spiral or loop. And they need to seize those moments to step up into that. So that's where I feel like, you know, there are moments that we need to do. And then once we've kind of held the tension and then the group has resolved the things, we can kind of ease back to our quest to make ourselves redundant. But when we see these moments, I think master facilitator ought to be called to intervene in a way that serves the group.
Yes. And I think that's indeed the high art. So how do you know when it's time to step in because they need this slight push? And when is it time to step back and trust that, they will figure it out?
Yeah. And this is in the realms of the intuitive, which all of us facilitators would be aware of, because there's no schema that can say if this, then that. We have to be just attuned. And this is where I find myself sometimes using the term energy. It's a very vague, non-specific term, similar to vibe, but there is a sense that if you're attuned, you know when the time is right. What's often on my mind, though, and actually this is a question I wanted to ask you. This is a slight tangent, but it is related. In my own reflections of the pathway to facilitation, I know I've got my own past of my parents breaking up when I was very young, And so I'd stay with my mom, and then I'd stay with my dad, and I'd see different perspectives, different versions of it. And there was part of me that was trying to synthesize, but also understand there's different contexts and so on. And then I think from a young age, that sense of seeing different perspectives and then trying, perhaps there's this part of me that's always yearning for harmony, or for at least for people to kind of be able to see and understand each other. It's brought into things. So sometimes when I'm in that moment where that tension arises, and you've got the big, serious alpha executive man who doesn't realize that they're actually potentially the main part of the challenge here, and everyone's too scared of them to be able to say anything. So everyone's dancing around, but the emperor has no clothes. But then as you kind of highlight this to them, you've got to realize that this person's actually got their own insecurities, and they're maybe feeling terribly alone and fragile, and all their armor and bluster is a protective mechanism. So how do we do this in the way that's gentle, that doesn't create division, that all this is in hyper real time, code word anxiety potentially, or something like that. That's just transmuted into some sort of higher service. But I wonder, in your experience, for folks who found their way to facilitation, is there any do you notice any pattern in terms of it may not have be growing up through a divorce, but something that sets people on a pathway? Like what's been your experience in chatting with 200 plus people?
And it's funny that you asked the question, because while you were speaking, I was like, I wonder whether there's a pattern. Because I think from the conversations I had with fellow facilitators and also my own upbringing. So my parents are still married, I think over 50 years. And I remember the most difficult times when I was a kid, just hoping that they would divorce. Oh, it would be so much calmer at home if they would just split up. And I think as a kid, believing that it's on me to create harmony and to make sure that everything is fine, that mom and dad get better along. And I hear it from actually many facilitators who grow up in environments where there is maybe an underlying conflict, or they have, as children, the sense of responsibility of the adult stuff. And I think this, at least what I can say for me, is it made me hyper aware of moods and the energy in the space. So I know exactly, okay, is this going to blow up? Is it the silence before the storm, or is it safe? And I think this creates an intuition.
Yeah. There's and no doubt you'd know there are certain topics that can lead to potential flare-ups, or there are the conditions, and how do we shape that. So there's another element to this, and there's if I was to think to one of the things that I find frustrating about facilitation as a profession, and this is mainly frustration at my own self that happens many times, and definitely a lot more when I was younger, is that there can be this insipidness that happens with facilitation, this desire to harmonize and to make everything nice, and let's make sure that everyone's perspective is heard, and that there's I'm going to contrast this, because a good friend of mine, Tyson Yunkaporta, he's an Indigenous scholar. He wrote a book called Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Change the World. He's a wonderful guy. Within Indigenous Australian culture, there's this concept of yarning, which is where you actually have time for conversation at depth and at length. It's not kind of boxed in or anything, but it's also not one person talking and then the other person taking time to talk. It's where there's like an energetic dynamic, and sometimes there's like emotion and stuff like that, but everyone's kind of attuned. Everyone's collectively facilitating, but attuned. And sometimes when I've had the joy of witnessing it, seems like very respectful, organic, alive. And then some facilitation, when it's been kind of like a harmony seeking that hasn't transmuted into the maturity of knowing, okay, I need to step in here, or this is the moment, or I need to intervene in a way that kind of surfaces this, because I can see that there's something festering here. And the reason they brought in an external facilitator is because I need someone to pattern disrupt this.
Yeah.
But if we don't get to that point, I do find it frustrating where sometimes a role of facilitation may be seen to be everyone keeping things nice, keeping it harmonious, making sure everyone feels safe and heard. And the psychological safety, if that's done too much, that can have its own kind of toxicity to it, where I know it's a controversial thing I just said, but like
No, I
hyper
love
psychological safety
it.
is like, where is the danger? Where is the, like, let's actually have some courage to be disliked.
Thank you for bringing that up. So many, I now see this onion in front of me and I just want to peel off.
Go for it. Yeah, I'm all with the word cloud. So yeah, I just gave you.
I love that you point out this desire to have harmony and to step into the space for that. And what came to my mind was a distinction between seeking something or avoiding something. So I think if we're facilitating or interacting with a group because we seek clarity, conclusion, decision, it's a different energy than if we interact with a group avoiding conflict. And I think the moment we avoid, then maybe we're the wrong person for the space.
Yeah, I think it's a really wise distinction. And if I think back to my own, I have this kind of cringe reel where I look back into past, every day I reflect back on something I've done in the past that make me cringe. And if I think back to some of my very early facilitation engagements, I was so worried about making sure that the client and that everyone in the room liked me and thought it was good and it all worked well and people had a good time, that perhaps it was more of an avoidance of anything that was, being disliked or having the client not happy and stuff. But I've been through all the baptism of fire and all of that stuff now. It's there's a different way to approach it. But it does. Here's the thing, though. I mean, do you brief your clients about this? Because, if your client's thinking, I'm going to bring this facilitator on board because I know that, this is the answer and I just need to kind of get people to see it.
That's facilitation.
Do you be like, okay, whoa. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if the client states what the outcome is supposed to be and need me, then I would say, no, sorry, I don't do that. Because I've been in such a situation once at the beginning. That's my biggest cringe moment when I sit back, where it was a big name client. They told me basically, there are a few people in the space. It's not so important what they say. What's really is important is to get these people to speak and to take the decision at the end. And I wasn't mature and confident enough back then to say, you know what, why don't you do it yourself? Anyway, so nowadays I would brief the client and say that I assume the reason you're bringing me in is to also have someone with the courage to point at things that remain unsaid and to voice the elephant in the room and to contradict so that they know. And usually they appreciate that. And I must say that I love to work with intelligent groups. That sounds super snobby.
Yeah.
But working with a room full of engineers, it's great because they don't have the communication skills like the HR department, but they have the intellectual capacity to also recognize that, this was a blind spot. Thank you for pointing that out. I don't take it personally.
Yeah. I'm totally with you. I say I like working with smart and skeptical audiences that have seen it all before. But on the flip side, I am so bad with green, young, naive folks that are full of optimism and kind of hope. It's like you bring me in, I'll corrupt them. So yeah, it's there's two sides to the coin. But yes, I'm with you. It's nice. There's this concept in adult development, which is a field rife with some dangerous interpretations. But these models of cognitive complexity. And one of the writers I really love, David Chapman, has this website called metarationality.com. And he also has meaningness.com, meaning.ness.com. But one of the concepts of metarationality, which I think that engineers and other folks through STEM backgrounds are quite good at, is that moment of realizing that the model in which you're viewing the world has blind spots or isn't quite seeing things accurately. And when someone else points it out to that, if you have the meta-rational capacity to be like, okay, I need to update my own kind of heuristics or ontology or way of seeing things, that's profound.
Yeah. And I wonder whether it actually comes from the perspectives on the world that you constantly try to falsify. So, okay, it's only the reality until the moment where it goes wrong. And that's a very scientific mindset. And I think as a programmer or engineer, you're constantly looking, okay, where does it fail so that you can improve it? And it's a very different mindset.
Okay, there's two threads on this. I love this. First of all, I just want to make a quick note. I love people that are willing to take a science-based approach. It irks me to no end when people want to take an evidence-based approach. Because often with an evidence-based approach, people are fixating just upon evidence that's been collected in another context, in another time, without having observation or experimentation.
And without understanding the data. I mean, you did a PhD in behavioral science, so I assume you collected data of human behavior. Then also being aware of, my statistics teacher always said, I don't trust any statistic that I haven't faked myself. And being an experimental economist, I know that, okay, if I just choose the target group and the measurement group and the differently, then the results will change. So evidence is very biased. Or not, biased.
Exactly. And it works from a propaganda perspective, but you have to do a lot of unpacking to understand where it comes from. And this is the second point I want to relate to when you're saying constantly seeking to falsify. There's a branch of philosophy known as metamodernism. Have you heard of metamodernism?
No. So
if we look at modernity, and the kind of philosophy of modernity was belief in rationalism, belief in the individual, belief in, our institutions. Then came postmodernism, which actually brought a lot of critique, which was like, oh, okay, well, that's good, but why is it only, typically men who's winning the awards? And why is it that you say this particular thing, but you don't have this? But post-modernity just brought only critique. There was no reconstruction that happened on the other side of the deconstruction. Metamodernism attempts to synthesize postmodernism and modernism in some sort of superposition. So I can say, look, we got a lot wrong with modernity, but we also got a lot right, and we can potentially learn from some of these things. Yes, we haven't kind of got equality as perfect as we can be, and this kind of there's another thread here that I like, is that there seems to be this very anti-woke stance that happens in the world. I'm all for being post-woke. I think it's actually useful for people to have a moment where they realize systemic inequality and how complicit we are and how limited our systems are. It's just not a stable state to stay in, just as post-modernity is not a stable state to stay in, because you can't just spend your whole life critiquing things. It's just when we get to that next synthesis point, and one of the charms of metamodernity, and you can see this in metamodern artworks and cinema and stuff, is this what's known as sincere irony or ironic sincerity. And this has been something that served me so well, because nowadays, when it comes to, say, speaking, because everyone, it used to be that TED Talks were a profoundly wonderful thing, and now there's so many of them, they've become almost a parody of themselves. And when someone's being super sincere, I don't know, but I often can't trust them. I'm like, hang on, this sounds too polished and stuff like that. My bullshit meter's So having sincerity with a bit of an irony or a bit of awareness that what you're saying is mostly true, but it might not actually work out in the future. All we're doing is sharing our proto-synthesis, whatever we've lived through, and all of our knowledge and experience, we've synthesized it, but it's only ever a prototype that we're constantly updating. Then that means we're constantly falsifying our own self, but we're not to the point where we're diminishing ourselves and not contributing. We're still contributing with sincerity, but with enough ironic distance to be like, okay, what I sincerely and earnestly believe here, I'm also wise enough to know that this might not be the case and it might change over time. So there's a lightness, a dance to how we go about it.
And what I love about that is that it almost invites the audience or the others to contribute and to have a look. It's as if you're just saying, oh, come here and have a look with me, instead of postmodernism, just finger pointing at the others. You did it wrong, and I'll fix it. And then one reply could be, okay, let me fix it. But then it's a dead end or a catch-22.
Yeah.
But inviting them and leaving the space, not taking ourselves too seriously. I think that's a very facilitative approach and can be I can see how helpful it is, because very often with the groups we deal with are the complainers, the naysayers, the finger pointers, and we need to break this routine.
And break the expectations of perfection, because there are sometimes impossibly high standards that people call things to, the result of which means that we become locked in a broken status quo. But anytime anyone tries to propose something, it's not perfect. So therefore, it doesn't get. We need to kind of be able to effectively dance or maneuver. There's a concept I really love of the judo flip, which is where you kind of, or the Aikido move, where you work with the energy of the room, but at the key leverage points, kind of flip it, and then we've done the paradigmatic shift, or something's unlocked, or something like that. But we're, rather than fighting the energy, we've kind of
work with it. Yeah. And there is a concept called verbal Aikido, I think, and I love it.
Oh, yeah.
Where you use the energy or the words of someone to flip it and to bring it back to that person.
That's cool. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'll look that up.
Yeah, great for facilitators, verbal Aikido. I would like to come back to another layer of the onion that I put aside earlier, the psychological safety.
Slow cooked onion, yes. Yeah, great. That's good. It's low and slow. We want the onion, don't want to rush the onion.
Hopefully that it won't make us cry. Because I'm not sure I agree with the statement that there can be too much psychological safety.
How dare you?
And I wonder whether it's, I would assume that at the end of the day, when we clarify the wording, we do agree.
Oh, yeah.
But for me, psychological safety is the context or the norm within a group where we can show up as our authentic, imperfect, vulnerable selves. It does not mean that we have to be all nice to each other and not criticize. And it's rather the opposite. It's a space that is safe enough to criticize without taking it personally.
Yeah, totally with you. The main thing I see is where the concern for psychological safety is done on overdrive. And there's a hypervigilance that gets in the way of, here's an example. In a good facilitated session, I love getting the room to the point where someone's sharing something, and then they're sharing something, and then someone's like confident enough to actually skillfully, with empathy, interject and be like, hang on. I think we're missing something here. Now, in a toxic psychological safe environment, my worry would be that people would be so worried about interrupting others, and they want to make sure everyone's heard, that everything becomes a little bit stilted. And then also, if we really play with it, it's where you kind of start going around circles. Okay, I just want to authentically share. Okay, I just want to say I'm very grateful for what was said over there. At the moment, I'm feeling a little unsafe in my chest and stuff like that, and and then it just, cool, this is good, this is nice, but I think we've missed something key in terms of the psychological safety thing. We want it to be, genuine. We want it to feel like we're a group of friends in a lounge room together, talking about something that we all care about, and we all care about each other.
Yeah, where we criticize ideas and not the person behind it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then I think it's, again, when this overemphasize of psychological safety in a toxic way would mean avoiding conflict, whereas creating psychological safety in a healthy way is almost seeking conflict. But
I love that phrase. Yeah. Your distinction before avoidance and seeking, I just think it's just a really good heuristic. Yeah.
Because then we do want to create the psychological safety so that we can have this healthy conflict.
Often, a lot of the time, I feel bad about this. Sometimes I have a team that is doing well, that has a good strategy, that's working well together, and I have time with them, and I'm doing these kind of probes to try to ask questions like, all right, what are we pretending to not know? Or things like that. And I'm trying to find something that we can work on, And then when we do find something, it's like, cool, let's we play with that. But then I have to be like, just sense check. You guys are doing great. We're just kind of taking this perhaps out of context here. But my worry, again, perhaps this is the same how I don't trust pure sincerity. I worry when things seem too neat, too good, that everything is like too harmonious, too perfect. Like I worry, are we stagnating here? Are we resting on our laurels? Like surely there's got to be something. that's how I often feel when I'm approaching this.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I was thinking, okay, there's a scenario in private life where, yeah, sometimes it's okay that just everything is nice. Let's enjoy it. But then, yeah, in a group context, especially when they called in an external facilitator, what are we not talking about? What are we avoiding right now?
And sometimes I feel like, with a good offsite, like this is what I wish, this would be career limiting for me, as in like I wouldn't get much work from this. But sometimes I feel like, guys, you literally just need to spend a couple of days together. Like, let's just find a good location. Let's remove most of what you've got in your agenda, because honestly, it's the time that you spend. Like I love it when offsites are 2 days, because the dinner that people have, particularly in day one, if we get to go in some tense areas and to some dark patches and stuff like that, and then kind of bring it back, that's opened up new avenues of intimacy and depth and connection and conversation, vulnerability, and so on. Then people have the dinner, and dinners are a mythic thing that people share together. But then it's the whiskey at the bar or the late night conversations that happen afterwards. It's finally seeing those two people who haven't been talking to each other for the last 6 months actually sitting down, and it's like, oh, this is what it's all about. And then on day 2, everyone slept on it. They've rethought about it. They can't. It's just. It's perfect. And the reason it's perfect is because, yes, there's some facilitated sessions, but there's also healthy space for emergence in between that, like a context where people can come together and be.
And you make it sound as if it's the space that just provides it. And I think that's a facilitated act. So I think, yes, you can facilitate the session, obviously, but you somehow also the liminal space in between. What is your source, your add to create this emergence that actually something is prone to happen after dinner or during
this is a really, very wonderful question. Let's go through. Let's say that I have a willing client that appreciates the potency of what can be achieved. And ideally you'd have, I like a handwritten letter from the person organizing it to everyone who's attending in advance, with a question that they would like them to ponder, or a question at least, here's what's on my mind. Have a think of what's on your mind too, because this is a rare opportunity where we actually will have time to talk about the things we otherwise don't have time to talk about. And this question, what's on your mind, my good friend Michael Bungay-Stenier, I'm not sure if you've spoken to him yet.
Not yet. He's another one that I haven't even dared approaching.
Oh yeah, I'll connect you. He's absolutely wonderful. He's like super, like one of the most loveliest people ever. He has a book called The Coaching Habit. And there are 2 questions in that I absolutely love. The first question is, what's on your mind? Or I like to think of it as the OM question, on my mind, OMM. And the next question he says is the OR question, AWE, and what else? And so as we think about what's on our mind and what else and so on, we have these letters that are primed people for. And then hopefully the offsite somewhere where there's some sort of journey that people need to take to get there. Ideally some location with crappy internet connection. So people arrive, there's some fussing about to try figure themselves out there. But then there's going to be some sort of pattern disrupt. They might be used to expecting some PowerPoint presentation deck, but it'll be something else. The lighting will be no downlighting, good ambient lighting, maybe some stools set up and stuff like that. And maybe there's, again, if budget's not an issue, a wine tasting or something from the local providor and stuff like that. And people are just settling in there, and there's a sense of ease. We're not having to rush here. And then, so we go through day, they sort themselves out. Let's say they came in the evening. Normally people arrive at lunchtime. I've already stuffed up my timeline. Anyway, the main point I get to is it's the dinner. And usually they want the facilitator to join for dinner, but I'm usually wrecked by then. But it's also something about trying to create the conditions where during the dinner, I will sometimes plant seeds of like important acknowledgement and gratitude things that happen, like a progressive toast that will happen to the individuals that are gathered. where everyone effectively should end day one feeling seen and heard and appreciated. And then we'll make sure that there is a bar or something like that, or that people can go for a walk, and that the day two doesn't start too early the next morning. So there is actually time to reflect, to journal, to integrate, to walk, and so on. And when we do gather, there is a sense of coming together, and there's not this artificial rush to translate whatever's happened into top tips or a neat action plan or things like that. There's this the reverence that we've had important things here. How do we actually keep this going? What does meaningful progress look like for us going forward? Things like that.
Thank you. And what I hear is a few ingredients. One is the explicit care shown through the letter, the handwritten letter, and a personal question that shows then the vulnerability and openness of the leader or the sponsor of the entire thing, which is an invitation for the others to also, and shows curiosity.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm asking you a question that is relevant for me, so I'm showing curiosity in what they think. And then the disruptions towards what they usually would expect. They would expect PowerPoint presentations. No, how can we make it differently so that they feel seen? And how can we give them time? And what comes up for me when I listen to you is that often we are so eager to write everything down and to have the list and the action items so that we rush through it to get that done, instead of trusting that if something emerges, an insight emerges because it grew and it riped. It will stick even if we don't write it on a flip chart.
Yes. And there's certainly rituals around how okay, so there's a couple of things that I do. Like early on, one of the things I like to do before we go into the group context thing is to genuinely have folks arrive. No, not just show up, but to arrive. And part of that arrival is an activity I get folks to reflect on their life as though it were an autobiography, where every single moment leading to this moment right now has been written down in this big unfurling story of their life. Not a preordained story, an unfurling story. Of course, it's narrative fallacy, but there's still patterns and themes. And if we were to take a look back at the last 12 chapters, the last 12 months, and take a step back and summarize and distill that into just one word, what would that word be? And this is where everyone gets an insight. They hear the kind of one-word themes. They get a glimpse as to the complexity of the different lives that people are living, because you've got some single parents, or you've got folks that there's all sorts, and people are just reminded that there's a lot going on for every one of us coming to here. So I find that's really an important step. And then before we leave, I remember I saw a presentation by Rowan Gunatelica. He's a guy, he's based out of Dublin, I think, at the moment. He made a mindfulness app called Buddhify. And he did a closing presentation. And his main thing was just reminding people that we've just had a shared experience in a context that's very unlike our normal day-to-day context. And something special's happened here, but we're going to return. And we've got partners that maybe have been looking after things whilst we've been away. There's emails to do and so on. Just try to be gentle with yourself as you manage this transition. Don't rush into these things. The important things will be with you. And I've really liked this sensibility as opposed to what I often see, which is, all right, what's your top 3 things and how are you going to do it within 24 hours back at work? And so how I like to close it is with everyone progressively sharing something they're grateful for and something they're excited about. Reflective gratitude, projective excitement. And that generally does this thing of helping people to ease into that next context, but with all the caveats I just said.
I love that. And it reminds me of something that I somehow forgot. So I used to do these 10 days meditation retreats, Vipassana, that for 10 days.
Wow, you did Vipassana.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to do that that's amazing.
So I've done 4 in total. And the last one was just before the pandemic. So it's time to go back. And why am I bringing this up? Because one insight that I had was that over the first 3 days, I have so many ideas because you don't read, you don't write, you don't talk. So there's a lot of time you spend with yourself and your own resources. And at one point you realize all these ideas are coming up. And then I was looking at places where I could steal a piece of paper, where I could borrow a pen just to
Yes.
secretly take notes because of all the insights that I had. And what I realized that after 10 days, the insights that are really relevant, that moved and touched me, they stay with me. And it's after Vipassana that I quit my job, that I started my business, that I found the topic of the podcast and all these things. And I think that's what I hear in what you described, just trusting that what's really relevant will stay if we just allow it a little bit of time and calm.
I love that. There's this part of me that's so warm to the mythopoetic, myth as a means to navigate complex challenges, because often, well, myths are, as Martin Shaw, the mythologist, Dr. Martin Shaw would say, myths are the beautiful lies that tell a deeper truth. And one of the persistent things within myth is this notion of the muse or the demon or the daemon. And as my own thing, I have this thing where I have these ideas that I try to almost kill off, but they persistently come back and haunt me. And there's almost this feeling like some of them have been 5 years. It just keeps coming back, and I just feel this intuitive sense that, okay, maybe the time is right. And then also there have been times that, I go and see other people do the thing that I had thought of years before, but that's okay. I didn't attend to the muse at the time. So I'm currently in a space of trying to work out how to cultivate a better relationship with my muse, or how do I relate to it as a concept? I don't know. But the Vipassana thing, I hadn't thought of that. I sometimes do hikes, and they're wondrously like the heavy lifting that nature can do when you're actually in the wilderness. Oh my gosh. Like, there was a time that I had pretty not deep depression, but a pretty long kind of disenchantment with. I got deeply concerned by climate crisis, and there's a lot going on in the world at the moment. I seem pretty prone to this. But then I'd spend time in nature, and oh gosh, the perspective that is granted on the other side. But we haven't yet done Vipassana. Both Kim and I have been wanting to, and it's quite a commitment. 10 days, or what is it? 5 days or 10 days?
10 days. It is, and it will change something in you. I think it's amongst the most difficult things I've done, and very transformative. Because I think what it really does, it helps you find trust in your own resources. So look inside instead of outside. And I think that's also what we do as facilitators. We trust that the group has all the resources and all the knowledge they need. So for me, Vipassana is this, okay, let's turn it around and do the work on ourselves and find the confidence.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And the other part is the physical pain of sitting for 10 days and meditating.
I've heard.
And not eating much. And then trusting that the pain passes. And as you see the physical pain pass, you then learn that, for the emotional, mental pain, it's just the same. It comes and it goes.
I'm very curious as to what your transition back from Vipassana into modern life is like. I did a hike once back when I was in uni doing eco-philosophy, where we hiked for 10 days in remote wilderness. But as we were back on the bus, coming back into the phone's reception range, you could hear the phones starting to beep again and people kind of tuning back in and getting lost in it. How do you go about managing your own state where you've day 10, and then you get to how does that transition work for you?
I think you have to be very careful, and I think your body also just knows where the limits are, because it's from being in a state where there's almost no noise, no input, and then the last day they allow speaking, so you start speaking with all the people that you've spent the last 10 days with. So there's a lot of noise already, and you can see the different types of people, some who immediately go and chat with others, and others who are like, okay, first need a little bit of quiet time, which sounds odd after 10 days to digest.
Well, I can't even imagine. I have a friend who did it, Vipassana, and I think he's one of these extroverted, loves to chat type of people. He was finding it really hard, even just non-verbal communication with other people, like giving them a smile and something like that, not necessarily by the rules. And he got told off apparently because he was doing the standing rock things where he had arranged rocks in a way that those stand up on top, and then others could see that, but that was a form of communication.
Yeah.
And I actually thought this is actually pretty profound to actually realize, what is this need? Where does this come from? And perhaps that was, what you were alluding to is like the trusting in your own resources, or you have this, like,
and that you don't need the confirmation or consolidation, or that's the wrong word, of others. At this, it was my first Vipassana, and I remember at some point I just broke down in tears and was sobbing and crying, and then the meditation was over, and I walked outside, took a shower, came back, and it felt so good that there was nobody coming to me and, oh, Miriam, what's happening? But I could just be there with myself and my own feelings, and I didn't have to explain or to excuse, that it could just be.
Wow.
And at the same time, doing the same. So you walk the rounds, and they told us that you have to pretend as if you were by yourself for the 10 days. So no glance at someone else, no communication, not even nonverbal. And I realized that in the beginning, I would then, if my glance meets someone else, I would smile at them. But then the next round, suddenly they don't look at me, they don't smile back. And then in my mind, I'm focused on them instead of focused on me. So every communication is a distraction from ourselves. And that's why they are so strict about it.
Yeah, fair enough. I remember reading a blog of some Silicon Valley tech dude who smuggled a fitness tracking device in, and then he was talking about his stats of how he got to meditate and so on. And both Kim and I, as we were reading it, were feeling like, I feel like you've missed the point of this in a way. It's not really something to be optimized. But, each to their own. Here I haven't done it, so I can't really, thou shall not cast stones or something. But I'm very much in awe of that, and you've kind of put it back on the radar for me to consider.
Do it if you get the chance.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
thank you.
because it reveals so many hidden sides. I remember hiding and doing my push-ups without any of the people looking, because I had this thing that I need to stay fit, but you're not allowed to exercise. So then someone coming to me and telling me, no, you're not supposed to do yoga or physical activity.
Yeah. The trickster in me would be so trying to find the edges, like just, but why? Oh gosh.
Yeah.
It was almost scary to think you kind of have to stare into the abyss or something. Oh gosh.
It is.
Anyway.
Yeah. Beautiful tangent. And I have a few more. I have one question that I parked previously, and then I have two of my standard questions that we have to squeeze in. I was thinking of what you mentioned about the offsites, and that usually these large meetings, they expect the leadership to give a presentation, and the leadership also wants to give a presentation. And usually they're not very good speakers. And I was wondering for you as a facilitator and a speaker who masters the craft of both, what is your recommendation or advice to these leaders who invite their people to an offsite? And then, of course, they want to share information, but how to do it in an interesting, facilitated way that it then also leads to emergence of whatever happens after?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is. First of all, it's great that they are bringing in an external facilitator, because there are probably so many meetings that happen where they think, I can facilitate this. And who knows what the group may be missing out on there. So number one, it's just fantastic that they're doing that. I think it's really good for the room to actually hear from the leader. It feels like, or at least the convener, the person whose initiative was to gather the team together, it really provides good context. And how it's often worked for me is almost do an intimate little interview thing to early on in the piece at the start, where so the sequence right at the start would be often I might kick things off as, speaker provocateur mode. And that's often putting out fires before they begin. That's winning over the most cynical and skeptical people in the room. It's basically having them primed that this is not going to be a waste of time where we just go through and tick boxes. This is something quite deep and important. And in my presentation mode, I have distinctions between meaningful progress and the delusion of progress. And we kind of unpack that so we can be aligned to meaningful progress. Then I would, have a chat with, so the group's warmed up, I would have a chat with and the group in that stage has already had conversations with each other. They've already done their reflective thing about their word and where they're at in life and what they're coming to. If the client has actually done the thing of the handwritten letter and what's on their mind and stuff like that, I might use that as a bit of an interview thing to go a little bit deeper into a few things. And really, this is a chance for the kind of the convener / client to say what's on their mind, what they're kind of worried about. I can ask them questions like, well, what are you like? If this was to be misinterpreted, what are you worried that people might think, or things like that? And it just gives them a chance to really kind of for them to feel heard, but also for everyone in the room to see that, oh, this person actually cares about us and where we're going and all of this, and this feels really important as an opportunity. And that usually opens things up. And then there's humor, and of course, facilitators need to be kind of part-time jesters as well, because it's the jester that tells truth to those in power, and a lot of truth is said in jest. So there's good humor and stuff, but there's also humor as a good leveler, because you want there to be equality amongst the room. So even though they've convened it, that doesn't mean that they're immune to, to having an honest, but also jestful conversation. So yeah, I find that usually is how I would navigate it.
Thank you. And it's so consistent with everything else you've shared so far. The interview style also brings in this slight imperfection, the humanness, because it's not the shaped PowerPoint presentations where it's rehearsed. And then you're asking questions that are just one level below the factual. So thinking of the impact and the context around it brings the humanness into whatever they have to share and why they called the group to this offsite.
Yeah. I will also have to brief the client to say, look, we're not going to I'll give you a sense, roughly we'll talk about some of these things, but just as you did with me with this, we don't want to have them prepared with the questions that they expect to be answered. Like, we don't want to have prepared answers.
Yeah.
I've had this habit of asking this odd question at the start where just to kind of have them off balance a little bit, where I was just asking them, like, how do you feel about mustard? And
all questions.
And then they're actually thinking about it, and they're like, well, I actually really like condiments, but I don't really like hot mustard. Seeded mustard is good. And I was like, no, okay. And we get into a food conversation, which is just such a universal appeal, because just we all love food, and that's a unifying thing.
Especially in Australia.
Then we can amble into the deeper questions. So, yeah.
I love that. That's, facilitating the conversation, creating the safe space for the person you're interviewing, showing their human side. I love it.
Modeling it for the rest of the group too. Yeah.
Yeah. And you made a distinction between meaningful progress and delusional progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you understand by delusional progress? So where's the trap?
All right. So the trap is, I'll give you a very quick tour. Our motivation, our focus, our attention, our behavior naturally gravitates to the things that provide the richest sense of progress. The things that provide the richest sense of progress are often default things. So they're well-established patterns of behavior, and the defaults are the options we choose automatically in the absence of viable alternatives. So this is the quick fixes, the familiar solutions, the default ways of doing things. Now, this can sometimes have us feeling quite productive. Yeah, the box ticking and all of that. Like, during the pandemic, there were a lot of leaders that resorted to micromanagement because it gave them a great sense of productivity. They felt good, but they weren't necessarily doing what the leaders need to be doing, which is stepping up and into complexity and ambiguity to shine a light on the path for others to follow. And so the delusion of progress is where everyone's working hard, we're really busy, we're ticking boxes, but are we moving closer to future relevance? And meaningful progress is that which brings us closer to future relevance, to the state of like our activities that make sense given the context that we find ourselves in. But asking the question, what is future relevance, takes curiosity, empathy, and it's kind of the reason why we gather together to make sense of things.
Future relevance, I love that. It's what are we avoiding? What are we not looking at? What's in our blind spot? Yeah, because nobody knows future relevance. So every perspectives are needed to collectively make sense out of it.
And there's this thing like we're already doing heaps of things that already don't make sense, let alone will make any sense whatsoever going forward. Then it's like a question of what lens are we taking? Are we talking about the business strategy? Are we talking about the technology we use? Are we talking about how we relate, the value proposition that we have, the key customer segments we work with, the activities, the value? There's lots within that, but that's kind of how I find it framed. And we also have a version of what the delusion of progress looks like for an offsite or for a facilitated meeting, where it looks like we've done work and we feel good, but have we actually moved closer to future relevance?
With this, then, so one of my standard questions is what makes a workshop fail?
Oh, yeah. What would make my workshops fail is it's usually, I feel like for me, the majority of my work is before the offsite itself, in trying to preserve the space for generative ambiguity. And when a workshop doesn't work is where we've arrived and the agenda is crowded and everything feels just a bit rushed and there just isn't enough time. And it's like this, it's a frustrating thing because I feel like I've arrived, I've kind of lost a bit of a battle because I know that we're limited in the amount of depth that we can go to. And ideally, the client is primed so that we know that the run sheet is more of an amusing hypothesis about how things might go, and that we want to have flexibility and be able to eat into lunchtime if we're somewhere really good and all of that stuff. But if it's a high stakes event and there's a bit of death by committee and stuff like that, no, I've usually the workshop will be a recipe for underwhelming success if I kind of don't intervene effectively in the earliest events, and that feels like a failure to me.
Thank you. The image that just came to my mind, or the insight, that especially in offsite, if we have this cramped agenda, it almost seems as if we know what's best for the group and have planned that. And then we want them to just run through it to tick the boxes. Whereas when we have less items on the agenda and design more for emergence, from what you explained beforehand, we almost transfer the trust or the responsibility into the group, trusting that they will make out of the time and get to something that we could not have planned in this cramped agenda.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not the extreme of an unconference where people show up and, there is absolutely no structure at all. There is intentionality around the contextual flow that we're trying to work towards. And there's enough kind of like premise there are enough conditions in place to ensure that there is some sort of movement that is facilitated, but it's a lot more open than perhaps a lot of clients are usually comfortable with. So it takes a little bit of coaching for them to I actually have a briefing soon with someone who wants to help their leadership team be better at navigating ambiguity. And they want to see my slides in advance. And I'm like, I wouldn't bring slides to something like this. So I have to do a lot of hand holding to make sure that they're okay with the ambiguity that we're going to be facilitating.
How ironic.
Yeah, it's ironic, but I'm not sure if they see it yet. Anyway, I'll hopefully help them to realize.
Beautiful. So what remains your number one facilitation challenge?
My number one challenge remains one of the key lessons from the book, and the title says it all, The Courage to be Disliked. I really keep bucking up against this sense of like, sometimes there'll be moments where we need to hold the tension. And even if you do that as delicately and as warmly and with as much love and skill and grace as you can, you still feel that the person has unprocessed stuff. And then it'll haunt me and eat away, and I want to check on them and make sure everything's okay. And And there's part of me that still needs to mature into what the authors of The Courage to Be This Light talk about as the separation of tasks, of knowing whose task it is. And my role as facilitator is not to be everyone's best friend, but is to help the group come to cohere and to, create the conditions that allow for emergence, that allow them to see better pathways to meaningful progress.
Amazing book. And yes, I hear you. And then if you had, coming back maybe full circle to where we started, would you then rather be disliked by the client or by the group? So, because sometimes we are in these situations, right? Where we either go with the client and their briefing or the group.
I think I have to say, so this is the paradox. I would rather be disliked by the client if I had to choose. But any clients listening to this, just know the reason is it may feel initially like a dislike, but I'm trying to serve all of you. And it's like, I get it. You just want the team to do the thing, and you bring in an external facilitator and it's supposed to make it easier. And then suddenly you realize, oh, I'm getting in the way or something here. This is all done with love. Even though it may result in that, it doesn't really quite, not that dramatic, but it's all done with love. Oh gosh, now I'm worried about the clients that listen to this. But yes, we must serve the song. It's like jazz, right? It's not about solo or any key star. It's like we got to serve the greater song.
Thank you. And I wonder whether it actually comes back to the delusional progress you mentioned before, that if we try to please the client, we'll go through the workshop and tick the boxes that they wanted, but it won't create this meaningful progress or create, what was the word you were using? Future relevance.
Relevance, yeah.
Because for that, the client needs the group. So they have to actually do the work and feel good about it. And then it's the long term, they might see that you're actually serving them by.
Oh, yeah. The client would be like, oh, no, you're right. I'm really glad for that. And, we'll keep in touch and there'll be some coaching or something and it'll all work out. Yeah. Great questions. I love it. I love that. Yeah, I love it. Thank you. This has been such a lovely chat.
Thank you so much. And we'll put your links in the show notes for anyone who wants to reach out to you, work with you. We haven't even talked about your books. They're amazing.
Oh, that's okay. Yes, thanks. I'm working on one right now, but that might not come out until the end of 2025. So
this will be a wonderful opportunity to have you back on the show then.
Oh, yeah. That'll look forward to that.
And in the meantime, where can your audience find you?
For my corporate propaganda, drjasonfox.com. That's drjasonfox.com. And for the stuff that's perhaps a little bit more career limiting, foxwizard.com is kind of my moonlight persona, where I get to write about the stuff that's emerging that may not be quite palatable or ready for enterprise land.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Beautiful conversation. Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.